Baila dentro de mí, la vida baila, baila dentro de mí, mira la vida bailar, esa vida por ti, vive la llama, baila dentro de mí, la vida baila. Baila dentro de mí, la vida baila, baila dentro de mí, mira la vida bailar, esa vida por ti, vive la llama, baila dentro de mí.
Can we turn it loud?
Baila dentro de mí, la vida baila, baila dentro de mí, mira la vida bailar, y se mira por ti, vive la llama, baila dentro de mí, la vida bailar. Ay, qué alegría.
My second role is as a DJ, but the way I get my songs is Kernel Slack. So it's available to everybody. Jam music, many legends from different disciplines are often put into that channel. Really warm welcome to everybody to the first fireside of the block. Alia posted a Slack message about an hour ago with a Figma link that I'm also going to repost in the chat right now. It's the same Figma link, it's the same gem file where we have lots of notes. We've now composted forward notes from a variety of different topics. There's 2 November 9th notepads on the evolution of trust and the art of conversation. There's the play of pattern that happened on December 7th. And then there's find lost paradises on December 12th, which is not technically from module 0, but it's based on an article written by our fireside guest, Aaron Lewis, on the garden of forking memes. So, you know, they're here and everything in them is an interesting set of reminders, I suppose, of what's come up in these conversations from different people. We have a new space off to the left, which is intended for today. And we ask that you treat it like a shared whiteboard during the course of the hour. The whole point for Fireside is for it to be increasingly participatory. So the whiteboard, seeing what other people are writing, finding your way near somebody else as they're writing, commenting on what they're thinking. It's going to be hopefully an option for the event and a way for you to take notes with others. We're going to ask you to share your questions early and often. There's a scaffolding of a few questions for Aaron based on what we know, but your questions and the things that you're excited about will guide the conversation more than that. And I think We'll start with just a few slides on where we are in kernel. If they bring up any notes for you, just know that that Figma is available. The first slide's for Aaron, just so that Aaron has a sense, and for anyone who's coming from past kernel blocks, just know that KB8 is an incredible group. We're really grateful to get to know them slowly and steadily. This is the first fireside. We've done kickoff, we've done 2 orientations. People have started to post adventures. So we have a really good beginning to the block. Many incredible people and many people that we're getting to know well as the days go on. We're just at the beginning of the flow as kernel learn goes. Introduction to kernel at the top comes with the topics, the play of pattern and trust. We then get into Ethereum's history and state next week, into the financial system, into the take back the web narrative, and onwards towards some more future looking things as the weeks go on. But the starting point here really tries to be an introduction to kernel, tries to describe what we're hopeful for here, both internally and beyond just kernel block. We, in Nikki Case's game, in the trust module, saw the phrase, "We are each other's environment." We are each other's environment, and the environment is way by which trust is most developed. So that's been something that has come up for kernel. And to serve the continued creation of trust spaces is an external goal in some of the adventures that we think everyone is working towards in crypto. I mean, the propagation of spaces of trust. And if there are more interesting forms of money that help us find more interesting trust spaces, then that's a big part of kernel as well. So that's what kernel is about. There's a few thoughts in the play of pattern on the idea of complementary opposites. The idea is being able to contemplate not only opposites, so in the context of crypto, the thoughts about decentralization good, centralization bad, or decentralized finance good, traditional finance bad, are the easy ways to start a journey. Trying to find the more interesting in-between spots. The ability to contemplate between is the hope of the play of pattern, and recognizing that the world is made up of opposites, and then our job is to find an interesting balance point is a big part of how we try to think in kernel and try to find humble answers to how we ourselves might build products, build experiences that appreciate the spectrum. And then there's trust. Trust is a big part of what blockchains are about. They're also a big part of societal narratives these days. And beyond the idea that we are each other's environment, we suggest that there's an implicit shift happening right now from trusting those who own media to those with whom we are actually transacting. And as much as possible, if we can get towards that world where we are trusting the people with whom we are actually transacting, we have a healthier starting place for all sorts of trust spaces that could propagate. And lastly, there's some more links, but I just wanted to pull up one more from the art of conversation. Conversation and dialogue is just a big part of kernel. It's the way that we often get to gather, just given the online format and the fact that dialogue is an easy way to if done well, bring people together. There's a really awesome quote from Paul Myberg from South Africa, who spent some time with the Kalahari Bushmen, which he says, the quality of listening determines the quality of speaking. When people are listening, I'm compelled to speak more truth. And this idea of horizontal conversations, where conversations continue, but can be felt, you can feel comfortable that a conversation can continue, that a conversation can pick back up the next day, that a dialogue may last longer than a fleeting moment. And if we create and cultivate spaces of horizontal conversation, you end up with a different experience of time. And that's all a very long-winded way to say that we're really excited to be with Aaron today. Aaron has helped us think about a lot of these topics and is referenced in the kernel syllabus in both modules 4 and 5 on posts that he's written about identity and the garden of forking memes, which we'll loosely get into today. But where I've gotten to know him even better recently is in the physical world, where in Washington, D.C., he's been helping to cultivate a space called Temperance Alley Garden, which is a historical garden in Washington, D.C. And I really wanted to maybe give Aaron the chance to describe the story of how Temperance Alley Garden began and his own journey from the digital world, where he's done quite a few interesting things as both a designer and an engineer and a builder, to the physical world, where he's been working with both educational space through Temperance Alley Garden and physical space, actually cultivating that garden, and use that as a springboard to conversation about trust and the patterns between the digital and physical. See where that takes us. Warm welcome to Aaron.
Thank you, Vivek. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. It's really good to be with you all. I'm grateful to share time with you here today. I'm streaming at you live from Washington, D.C., the U Street neighborhood in particular, which is in the northwest part of the city. And I'm excited to chat about gardening, digital and physical and relational. I am a time designer and landscape architect of sorts. And I first met Vivek on Twitter a while back. So I'm glad to be continuing the conversation. So as Vivek mentioned, I, for the last few years, have been slowly building up a garden park space alongside my neighbors in Washington, D.C. It's about a 10,000 square foot lot in an alley system here in the neighborhood. When I first moved to the apartment, there was this giant empty lot in the alley behind the apartment. And we started wondering, why is this lot locked up? Why is it barbed wired? Why is nobody allowed in here? It was completely suppressed, sterilized of all life. And this was in the beginning of the pandemic. So we felt like there was a big need for outdoor gathering space, for a place for the neighborhood to come together during the early days of the pandemic. So we started reaching out to the developer that owns the land. We emailed them over and over again until they finally responded, and we were able to work out a temporary lease agreement on this space to try to bring it to life. It's been slated for development for housing for a long time. So from the beginning, this project has been a temporary space, a pop-up garden park, and an experiment to see how much we can bring to life in a short amount of time, and to really explore what it feels like to care for a place that we know is going away, and practice the art of cultivation, even in a temporary place. So Temperance Alley Garden, it's a part urban farm, it's part time machine, and it's part a learning landscape. So over the last few years, we've grown it from this previously sterile parking lot to a learning environment where neighbors host all types of classes, workshops, art events, theater, poetry, music, agricultural education, ecology. And the goal is really to just connect neighbors with each other, with the local ecology, and with the historical memory of the place. So there's lots of portals to the past in our memory garden, and lots of opportunities for people to get to know one another and also to develop a deeper, more rooted relationship to place.
Aaron, I'm always amazed to hear about the garden in different ways. I like this last line from the website. We're sitting inside a special window in time, and we want to make the most of it by celebrating all that's blooming here now. And the willingness to engage in cultivation in a temporary space.
Yeah,
I
to
want to
speak a little to your question about um, my background in technology and how I got into placemaking. I started out my careering as a digital product designer, and through that world, I learned about an architect named Christopher Alexander, who's very big in the digital design world. Um, and I got really curious. I had seen how the UX design world borrows so many metaphors and models and practices from architecture. And so when the opportunity to start at this space came, I was really curious about kind of closing the loop and going full circle, back to the architectural design philosophy and theory that inspired my favorite digital designers. So it's kind of been a play for me to learn how much of my experiences designing digital environments could actually like be poured out into the design of the built environment in my own neighborhood. Yes, Temperance. Thank you, sister. Temperance is the historic name of the alley. Um, it's been called that since the late 1800s, actually, but it works really well uh, for our project because it speaks a little to the temporariness. Usually when we think of temperance, we think of like the temperance movement and prohibition, um, and moderation of alcohol consumption. But prior to the prohibition movement, temperance was a more general virtue that just means like the right usage of something, the right use. And so we're trying to steward a right use of time, and time is sort of our substance or our medium that we get to play with. So how can we use it well is the invitation of temperance.
the I want to go even further into temperance, partially by sharing a zine that I picked up when I got to visit the garden. I know it's probably kind of small, but I'll try my best to share it. This is the visual in the middle of the book that you have to actually open up. So let's start kind of looking like that. And then you can open it and get a sense of a starting point, how you enter the garden, and it's a real look at how the rest of the garden looks and how it was designed. There's a lot of thought that has gone into each level of the garden, all the way from bottom to top. And it's a zine, so that's the map page, but there's another page on temperance, specifically the word on its different roots. And Aaron has already started by talking about it a little bit, but one of my favorite pages in the zine. And I wonder if you're willing to talk about it a bit more. I know that the image here it's called Temperance Bearing an Hourglass. And people here have already asked the question, you know, what do you mean when you call yourself a time designer? And I'd be curious if you could expand a little bit, talk more about the word temperance and the roots that it's provided you.
Yeah, so the map that Vivek is showing there, that's the pattern language of the garden was designed sort of like a dance with one of our neighbors. She was really interested in the relationship between garden body and human body. And so when the lot was just a when the lot was a sterile site with nothing in it, she had the notion of designing a meditation walk along the length of the garden from front to back. So as you walk the length of the garden body, you also are invited to meditate on different elements of your own body. So the map that Vivek showed is sort of a cartography tracing the meditation walk that is the garden. So there's a close relationship between that walk and the architectural configuration layout of the garden. The architecture or the layout of the garden is itself inviting that meditation. When it comes to time design, I live in a historic neighborhood in DC. It's designated as a historic district by the city. And there's a lot of really, really wonderful, deep history here. Martin Luther King Jr. had offices just a block away from where I'm sitting now. Is a really active center of civil rights movement in the mid 20th century. And it's also a place where a lot of recently freed slaves migrated right after the Civil War. And so we call the garden a time machine because we've created all these different portals to local historical memory throughout the site. And we see as one of our big purposes is to help people develop a sense of not only where they are, but when they are in the story of our neighborhood, and to kind of weave themselves into that story so that they're able to participate in it and not just and be somewhere in particular rather than just like dropping in and living a kind of transient urban life where you sort of could be anywhere. So the time machine element is really an invitation to neighbors to travel back in time to the history of this alley, of the stories that it holds, and of the broader historical memory of the neighborhood. And I always have an hourglass on hand somewhere. And I discovered when I was doing some research on temperance that in the Middle Ages, temperance was often depicted as a lady holding an hourglass, which I love because it's back to that reminder of the right use of time, or a prudent use of time.
love that. Yeah, the hourglass that Aaron has on hand, I've experienced with him a few times where he has a couple, but there's one that's about 15 minutes per flip. And sometimes we'll be having a conversation and we'll get on a topic that seems worth exploring further. And Aaron will say something like, do you want to spend a flip just exploring that? And I'll say, of course, inevitably. He'll flip it and we'll have 15 minutes, which is in hourglass form, something that feels like a lot more time somehow uh, to go deep on that topic. And I hope that Aaron's stories have illustrated what he's meant by time design. There's much more I know he could say there, but what I want to focus in on now
Here's
as a
one
part of
other little object. This is since the space is temporary, we we really try to foreground the temporariness of the place instead of trying to like shy away from it or hide it. So we designed these little time cards that we give to everybody, which shows the beginning, opening of the garden, and then the end date. And it says you are now, and here's where you are in the story. So inhabiting this sort of shared calendar, not shying away from the temporariness, but really embracing it is also part of the time design of the space. So everyone's kind of inhabiting the same clock, and the space itself becomes a clock as you experience its presence in relationship to the seasonal and celestial rhythms as well.
I just want to, yeah, I mean, I just want to point out to me the level of care and detail that's been put into the garden. And there's another link at the bottom that's reference to Vincent van Gogh from The Marginalian, which is one of the better places on the internet in my books, where Maria Popova is writing about the letters that Vincent van Gogh was writing to his brother Theo. And Alia's nephew's name is Theo, new baby. And he writes this quote right here, and then I want to come back to one other thing in the syllabus, one that says, I'm always inclined to believe that the best way of knowing is to love a great deal. Love that friend, that person, that thing, whatever you like, you'll be on the right path to knowing more thoroughly afterwards. That's what I say to myself. And in that as well, we come back, and for the first time in the syllabus, actually, even though we've talked about trust as a module, the word trust spaces comes up. And it states that Van Gogh presents tinkering as a better way of being. In our own time, it may not be about building more products for consumers, but rather using new trust spaces to commune in a different and digital sense. So it may not be about building more products for consumers, but rather building new trust spaces to commune in a different and digital sense. And I just want other people to reflect on whether they've seen in a different and digital sense anything that resembles Temperance Alley Garden, because in my book, although Aaron has taken a foray away from interface design and product design in order to do this in real life, it's very rare on the internet to find a website that's taken as much care to map the cartography and invite such interesting participation. And one of the questions, this is basically what we're getting at with trust spaces, and the hope that there might be more of them on the internet. And I'm curious, Aaron, what you think about that analogy, and for anyone else at this point, we can start to get into unmute territory if you have thoughts or questions for Aaron.
Yeah, I think to tie together the trust piece and the time piece, um, one of the other goals in the space is to invite people to enter alternative time zones or alternative temporalities. For example, we host an event called Turtling, which is sort of like the opposite of a jogging club. And it's like an hour-long game slash sporting event slash meditation where there's like a surround soundscape of music playing at 0.25x speed, and you have to move and speak in super slow motion for the entire duration of the event. So you enter into this new time zone. And I think what's been beautiful about the space and sort of experimental events like this is because we've over time developed a culture of trust amongst the neighborhood and amongst all the friends of the garden and the people who come and participate. We have this like implicit permission to explore different kind of out there ways of being together, and that layer of trust that grows as you care for a place together offers such an expansion of possibilities in terms of the different ways that you can experience time, experience each other, experience the city. But it all really rests on that foundation of trust that comes not as an abstraction, but as a like quality of attention that you have paid together alongside the others who are there caring for the same creatures as you.
Rebecca, please go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to offer just another analogy that comes to mind in digital spaces that I would probably guess everyone here has probably experienced, which is what are the tools that we use for our so-called second brain? For me, it's a mixture of tools like Notion and Arena, but there is something really interesting that happens in terms of our relationship to time when we are in that flow state of curating and observing, and there's kind of this engagement. And I feel like what Erin is talking about, and I'm very, very lucky because I've been to this incredible garden. It is like stepping into a time machine, right? The structure of the environment shapes how you experience it. And I think a really cool metaphor that I've seen used is like, what does an internet look like that feels a little bit less like a shopping mall, a little bit more like a library or a neighborhood cafe, right? So here we start to talk about things like intimacy gradients. But certainly tools that encourage us to go deeper, whether that's into ourselves or into shared connections or ideas or with other people, are tools that feel like they do also bring in new temporalities. And I know that there are so many of them, and there's people that have shared other things in the chat. But yeah, the one that came to mind for me was Arena. And then I also come across Sublime, which I think is built by similar people. So I'll share those as links here if you haven't seen them.
JP, please go ahead.
Yeah. I have a question, Aaron, and I will try to frame it as I'm thinking about it. You have spoken a lot about time and how your relationship with these time frames makes you experience what happens on a different way. And working with this garden opens the possibility to engage with nature. And like I'm thinking about the timeless aspect of nature. And my question is, how does your relationship with the garden being an expression of the timelessness of nature, inform your relationship with the blockchain or blockchains, being blockchains also an expression of timelessness? We don't know if they are gonna be together, but I interact with them as if they were going to be there together. So I wonder, what is your relationship between blockchains and timelessness, informed by your relationship with the garden?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that my relationship to blockchains and the garden is more maybe more metaphorical than tactile or tangible, in the sense of like, I think one thing that's interesting about blockchains is the way that they sort of run in a separate time zone themselves. Like block time exists outside of universal coordinated time. And so in that way, there's this maybe a parallel or an analogy between the type of time bubble that blockchain creates around itself, and the type of like time bubble or time zone that the garden creates around its place and being. And I think they're both good examples of how a space or technology can kind of be like an epicenter from which time or an experience of time radiates, that these objects, these technologies, these places, I love the metaphor that they sort of like emit time like a lamp. They radiate it or they shine it in a particular way. So I see maybe a parallel between block time and garden time there. But I think there's whereas two other things that come to mind is like whereas blockchain is very linear accretion, the experience of time in the garden space, while there are like timeless, archetypal eternal qualities to the garden, there's also this like cyclicality and seasonality and rhythming that you don't get in a system that is just like accruing linearly over time. So I appreciate in the garden time the quality that is more cyclical or spiralic, that gives you that kind of like drumbeat across the seasons to tap your foot to as you journey through the year. But one thing that we do try to do in terms of like creating chains of time or chains of memory is every solstice and equinox, we call everybody together and we have people write letters to their future selves, which they will then open on the next solstice or equinox. And we store those letters to the future in a time capsule treasure chest that we have on site. So then when you come back on the next solstice or equinox, you open up the treasure chest and you find the letter that was cast to you by your past self. So I kind of think of that as like a chain of memory that you're weaving or stringing across time as you journey through the rhythms of the garden.
I think those types of uses of a global permissionless timestamp machine will only become more and more interesting as time passes, and it then goes back to our creative relationship with time, which comes up later in the kernel syllabus, specifically in module 3 on Take Back the Web. The way that we experience time turns out to be like maybe the most important political question, and something that gets explored in great detail in that module. I want to, shout out some of the people taking some good notes here. George Michael saying he was reading the rest of Liberating Clocks, Block Time and Garden Time, working on planning a local community learning space, temporality being something that was discussed, quality of attention paid in the shared space as maybe a metric of note. And George, would love to hear from you. I saw some other thoughts and comments from people in the right side of the board. Let me see if I can find some musings from Harry on geologic time, accelerating and freezing geologic transformations at different states. And Harry has an architecture background. If anyone who's written anything in here wants to poke at it, please feel free. Appreciate you writing the notes in. There's a good one in the chat from Joan. Question on Chronos versus Kairos time, and if there's a place for Kairos in relation to blockchains. That question, let's see. I thought another one up in the chat from Ehab was the paradigm shift from nowhere to now here. Thought that was interesting. Great wording. Never seen that one before. Yeah. Open to any questions, or Aaron, if there's any specific spot that you think double tapping on might make sense. I was also thinking about campus complex as a means of exploring next beyond Temperance Alley, and maybe double tapping on designing spaces like this on the internet, or propagating the pattern in any ways beyond Temperance Alley. If you've given that any thought, how you're thinking about the next phase, knowing that the garden itself will have a temporary nature to it, but that this idea or this way of living can continue on in different ways.
Yeah, one of the things I'd like to share, since this is a digital crew, is how we've been experimenting with USBs. We have a partnership with USB Club, which is a friend's company. And as I mentioned, there's this time capsule treasure chest in the back of the garden, which is like our archive. People leave behind their mementos, artifacts, art pieces that they've made in the garden. So it's like a little archive. And a question that I've held is how to digitize the archive in a way that respects the medium and the hyper locality and the site specificity of the project. So my friends at USB Club, they built this device called the USB ATM. And it's a way for us to turn people's USBs into little mini treasure chests, little mini archives of the garden that they can carry around with them in their pockets. So the way it works is the USB ATM, there's a big e-ink screen, there's a little USB port, there's a receipt printer, and when we do what we call a file harvest, neighbors come, we give them a USB, we say, here, this is like a digital locket for carrying the archives that matter from the garden with you. You get to plug in your USB, and we drop you live audio recordings and video from the garden. We drop you a little time capsule of like really cool historical documents and historical photos of the space, and also share like audio interviews and oral history that we've collected from neighbors who have come to the space. And it's a way of sharing the archive in a way that the digital content is still rooted in the place itself. And instead of being in the cloud, it's in our earth, and is tethered to the site. So you have to show up to retrieve it, but you can still we can still distribute it. So now all the neighbors who have these little USB lockets are able to kind of carry a distributed version of our archive in a very tactile, tangible way throughout the neighborhood, which has been, yeah, a fun way of playing with sneaker nets, the local sneaker net in our area.
It's really awesome. Yeah. It's just also, yeah, it's just such a different experience to click through those files, having picked them up, and then yeah, not receive them from a feed, not receive them from a message thread, in a folder native to your computer.
Yeah, I think the distribution mechanism is part of the message, is part of the content, is how you got it, and how it ended up in your possession.
Yeah, yeah.
What
I
do
think
people grow in the garden? Jess is asking. Would you say the garden's philosophy has affected that choice? And what have you learned about time from your crops? These are good questions.
Aaron, is Josh on? Or
I don't know.
I don't think he made it. So Aaron, please, as best you can, but Josh would be great to answer these two.
So we have a communal growing model. So instead of individual plots, all of our beds are managed in common, which makes it really fun and easy to learn if you've never touched gardening or urban agriculture before, because you're not just left to your own devices in your own little bed. So what we grow is based on just the stories and interests and backgrounds of the people who grow here. So all types of different um, produce and herbs and vegetables. As an example, like one neighbor is really interested in making teas, so she kind of um, led the herb growing this year and taught people how to dry leaves and make tea. And how would you say the garden's philosophy has affected that choice? We try to make every like element in the garden a portal to a story of a neighbor, to have each thing like connect back to person or relationship, something that if you look to see what's under, you'll find like a soul there that you can commune with. So um, the growing choices are influenced by that philosophy in the sense that like we always want to grow things that connect back to story in some way, or connect back to uh or are like a seed of a relationship that you can form. And when it comes to what we learn about time from the crops, I mean, oh, what can't you learn about time from paying attention to plants? I think we one small thing is Josh, my partner, he hosts an ecology series in the garden called How to See. And we do this exercise called stare and share, which is where you grab a little collectible or element from the garden, like a leaf or a flower or something, and we have some magnifying glasses. And we just give you a permission slip to stare at it for 10 minutes straight, noticing everything you can about its form, shape, color, texture, smell. And then after the 10 minutes are up, you pair up with a partner and you sort of exchange noticings of like everything that your attention has uncovered or revealed during that time. And I think that it's shown us just how much time, the aperture of time expands when you're like given permission to just pay really close attention to something that you normally wouldn't look at for that long. At first it feels absurd, but then by the end you're like, wow, there's like endless amounts to notice and wonder at and share. So if you ever want to feel like you have more time on your hands, I recommend just going and finding something outside to stare at for a while.
Rebecca and I both were at the park for turtling as well. Also an incredible exercise. Actually, no, it wasn't turtling. It was
The brick.
Seeing a bug.
Seeing a bug, yeah. We flipped over a brick, which is no bigger than this, and we're asked to look at it. And I remember for the first 20 seconds, I was kind of like, oh, there's not really anything. I mean, it's just the backside of a brick. I don't know. And then you take another 20 seconds and you see that there's like a series of ants making their way down the bottom left corner. There's a larger grasshopper in the top right corner, kind of just hanging out. There are different formations that make it clear why the ants are moving the direction they are. And the aperture point that Aaron just made really rang true in that the permission to give attention to it allowed for a different type of seeing, which is yeah, definitely something that I'm hopeful we try to cultivate as we build things together in kernel. Is a suggestion that, you know, we can have conversations in kernel where we talk very specifically about the latest in blockchain developments, and we probably will as soon as next week with Ethereum's history and state. But this particular type of seeing is a big part of the Thursday fireside culture, where we try to play with our own patterns. Yeah, Rebecca, please go ahead.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, I feel like what you just ended with, you know, conversations about like what is time and how we design temporality. I've seen a lot of questions in the chat that are like, how does designing the garden relate to the blockchain? And I think the importance of asking these questions is precisely because when we start to play around with representations of value, you're going to end up with philosophical questions around what is fungible and what is non-fungible, and what do we represent, what do we give form that can be transacted and that can't be transacted. And I found beautiful analogies, but also lessons in spaces where you actually have to care for something that is physical, and starting to ask questions about how structure and space can affect the kinds of relationships that occur there. The philosophy underlying all these questions is just as applicable to designing something like a local currency, for example. Which is maybe something we'll get into in a different fireside. But as we start to question the actual use cases of blockchains and the kind of value that is represented, being able to grapple with these questions, as abstract as they can sometimes seem, is really, really important. So yeah, I felt the need to say that because I also have sat in many kernel firesides. I'm like, what are we actually talking about? How does this have to do with like Ethereum and trust? And it has a lot to do with it. So I'm really enjoying the kinds of questions and just the diversity of this meandering conversation.
Harry or Jason, please.
Hey, yeah, so I was wondering mostly about setting up parameters for the duration of time when like we're working within a temporary practice. Because I know a lot of the time we're reacting to external factors that kind of dictate how long we can do something or how long a certain project or practice or like garden, for instance, could be seasonal because of the way seasons work and how cycles of climate affect like how we're going to interact with an ecology. But when we do have the freedom, is there a way, and this is for Aaron mainly, and thinking about how you're a time designer, is like, is there do you find yourself trying to grasp for those parameters? Or like, is it something that you try to build yourself if you do have the freedom to do it? Or is it typical that you just find like there are these things available to you to just set up a framework within?
Yeah, I think in terms of parameters, expiration dates is a big one for me, and just like designing projects that are designed to expire, that are not meant to live forever, but have sort of like a death date or a graduation date built into it, I think is a really healthy way of allowing this sort of process of composting and renewal to take place in like institutions and organizations. But in terms of, I think what you bring up about parameters reminds me of like ways of tying this back into like protocols is like there's a few different like layers of protocols that that underlie the garden and the project. One is like, okay, you have an architectural like layout, you have an architectural configuration. The space is sort of like an instrument. After hosting like hundreds of events in this space, you sort of get a sense of like what are the different techniques for like playing this instrument, what are the different ways of activating it, or using it that make it run and work well. So you sort of develop these like protocols or patterns when somebody comes to you to be like, I want to do this type of event. And what would be the best way to accomplish it or make it a success. And so each sort of like program area or event genre has its own sort of like protocol that sometimes it's a social protocol, sometimes it's more like a movement protocol, like the way that the event actually flows through the constraints of the space. So that's like the layer of protocols as they relate to a garden event. But then there's also the layer of development and land use protocol. So as part of this project, we had to learn a lot about like urban planning and real estate and land management. And there's so many like zoning protocols that the city has, which are kind of like basically like the operating system for the way that you're allowed to use land in the city. So learning about the protocols that are in use for like the legal protocols for how projects get approved, how land use is determined, how the different parts of the neighborhood are zoned is really core to understanding like what the affordances and possibilities are when you're trying to like build a new space.
Awesome. Go
All
ahead,
right,
Jason.
what's going on, y'all? This is Jason here. Aaron, if you already answered this question, because I had to step away for a phone call, just let me know and I can just catch the recording. But my question for you is, has your concept of trust and time, has that changed when it comes to taking on that garden project, or has it remained the same? And if it's changed, in what way?
I think I've developed an appreciation for how slow how slow the trust building process is. I kind of thought like, oh, we'll sign the contract with the developer, we'll open up the gates, and then we'll just have like neighbors flooding into the place immediately. But actually our first interaction was like a breach of trust because we threw this like launch event and we had amplified music and our neighbors like backyards butt up against the garden space, and a bunch of them have small kids, and so the kids were napping and they got woken up by the amplified music, and it caused like a lot of issues because it felt like a breach of trust for them. So we had to go through this long like trust building process of coming to consensus around what are the shared norms and ways that we want to like steward and use the space. But it was ultimately beautiful to see how that like initial kind of breach or break in trust is what created the opportunity for mending and repair and more of an organizational structure and like formal consensus around space use would look like. So yeah, just the sense of like the time it takes to build, I've gained more of an appreciation for than I think I had at the beginning, and just also like the patience, because like in the early days we would just chalk in really small letters in the alley, like there's a garden being built this way, and draw some arrows that people could follow, because we wanted to find people who were like paying close attention to details and were willing to kind of go on an adventure down a mysterious alley. And so just having a little patience, like waiting for those people to come, and building the formal processes for creating trust slowly has been a deep learning.
Aaron, how you feeling? We got a few more on the raised hands.
Yeah, I can do a few more.
Yeah. George, please. Rich, Abidemi. We'll get to everyone.
Oh yeah. I don't know if I have a question, but I just wanted to say, like, I mean, I just love this so much. It's like I didn't expect to be thinking about time like this first week, and like the sensitivity to the passage of time, and like, you know, Chronos versus Kairos, with like the qualitative passage of time, and the difficulty and importance of building trust in like some sort of shared resource, and how, you know, what that makes possible, and the cyclicalism. I mean, where it really resonated was it was theater. Theater was one of these things where, you know, when we do it, it's like everybody takes it so seriously. There's so much to theater where that's you've got the functional hierarchies, and you've got like the fact that people are there because they love it, like they're there because they have to be. And then once the show is over, like they strike the stage and everything goes away forever, you know. And the only place it lives on is in everybody's memories, and it takes so much effort and so much like division of labor sort of, but it's all for love. So it just, I don't know, it just really resonates with me. They're like different areas, but like I just love this. So
Yeah, thank you.
That's incredible. Yeah. And George, thank you for all the notes in the whiteboard. They're incredible. Maybe Abidemi, then we can come back to Rich, and we'll do Rashmi. Abidemi, please go ahead. Yeah, we can't hear you though. We'll come back. We'll come back, okay? But we can't hear your audio yet. Rashmi, go ahead, and then we'll come back.
Yes, thank you, Vivek. Hey, Aaron, I had a question regarding the time design and the passage of time and things like that. So is there any way we could use time design to make peace with things that did not happen? You know, like sometimes we make a plan for ourselves or we really think that's something that's supposed to happen and we just passed it by or something. And in could we make peace with things that did not happen by using some time design concept? And another question was, is time fluid, or is it does it only move in one direction? That's my question.
When it comes to making peace, I think with things that did not happen, the time design approach to it would be basically transforming or flipping the regret of something that didn't happen into an idea for something that could happen in the future. So perhaps it won't happen exactly as I wished it would, but it does plant a seed in me of how it could be going forward. And my answer to whether time is fluid is that it depends on the time machine you're using. And in this case, it is kind of fluid, but also kind of solid. A mix between liquid and a solid, the beauty of sand.
Rich, good to see you.
Thank you, Aaron.
Can you see me?
Yes, good to see
Yeah,
you.
good.
Yes.
Hey, good. Ladies and gentlemen. So before I get to what I was thinking of saying, I want to address the last two questions because they were pretty cool. Something that people with like Alzheimer's do in therapy, they play music from when they were young to like revisit memories. And in that sense, time does sort of have anchor mechanisms to where you can travel back in time through emotional resonance. And does time flow in two directions? Well, when you think about history and like patterns that we see playing out with stuff like the business cycle or kind of bear and bull markets, there's one way that time repeats itself through patterns. And the thing I wanted to say was so gardens before humans kind of came along, they never really had this notion of waste. It kind of reminds me of this Bible quote. Let me pull it up real quick. Unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. So that's the idea of like fertilizer, basically. Everything in a garden is recycled. Now, how does that relate to blockchain? Back in the Industrial Revolution, kind of the first combustion engines were all based on this discovery that like if we make an explosion, but we can harness the expansion of the gas and like redirect it, then we can recycle sort of energy and entropy in that way. And not just combustion engines, but also like they're a more general sense called reciprocating engines. So like, well, the first thing that comes to my mind because I'm in Ukraine is assault rifles. But yeah, basically refi, it tries to learn from like these like cyclical things. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks for listening.
Incredible.
Thank
Good to-
you.
Thank you for sharing.
Let's see. Abidemi, you want to try one more time?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess for me, what has been interesting about this conversation, especially like my journey is in the reminder that like whatever abstract concepts we talk about, we speak about here, has to at some point like converge or like align with blockchain and Web3. So like when we speak of designing a supposed garden, something that I was really curious about and I see a lot within the space is also the sense of understanding that like sometimes if you have a garden, you might have weeds that are useful to your garden, but then you unplug it or you plug them out because you think that they are weeds, but like they are actual valuable. They provide value to your ecosystem in some ways. And I just like it's just occurred to me that like I'm not sure that we're sort of like thinking about that when it comes to the blockchain. Like there's so much negative about this ecosystem that has in its own weird way also like helped it grow or like grow. So I guess like I was just like juxtaposing that in my head that like what are the negative sides of like actually in the real sense of time collectively building a garden, or yeah, like what are the negatives within that and how are we conscious of those negatives within the blockchain, and yeah, how do we maybe sort of like harness or like find the usefulness in the negatives. I don't know if that makes sense, but that was just what's in my head.
Yeah, I think maybe it's related to what Pranay is asking as well about building trustful spaces, connecting the dots there. Seems like one thing is just like what is the when it comes to trust, it's like, what is your shared calendar? What is the time that you're occupying together? Things as simple as like, what are the holidays that you celebrate together, or the days that you mark? What is your shared sense of the end date and the start date of the projects? What types of gatherings are you producing or creating to generate a social field of trust? What sort of permission slips are you writing to help people act or share in ways that they wouldn't normally otherwise? And how does the actual like design of the space, whether it's a digital environment or a virtual environment, invite intimacy and vulnerability? And a big part of intimacy and vulnerability has to do with like the amount of gates that you walk through in order to get into a space, like the difference between the porch and the bedroom, or like the outer court and the inner sanctum. So as we think about designing digital experiences or physical spaces, being really aware of like all the thresholds that we cross through before we arrive at the common ground, the meeting place for conversation, is really core to building trust. So thresholds, calendars, expiration dates, social glue and gatherings. Those are some ways that I connect those dots in my own mind, at least.
Explains why communities, foundations, cooperatives, DAOs all become a major part about how blockchain ecosystems are attempting to be cultivated. Lots of stops and starts that are well documented and that represent the current state of things. But yeah, Andrea, please. I think we have maybe a couple of questions. One more question from Andrea. Let's see.
Yeah, I was wondering, well, I think when we're working on things like regeneration and kind of changing the systems in which we inhabit, a lot of the time it feels like we don't have much time, or we're running out of time. There's this sense of like, we need to change this now because it feels like the world is falling apart. But then at the same time, I feel like the sense of urgency and rushing sometimes can is kind of like part of a system which makes us kind of move fast without actually taking the time to feel through things. So that's something that I personally kind of struggle with in my work. It's like, when is it the time to like rush and feel that sense of urgency, and when is it the time to kind of step back and actually just be? So I guess the question is like, yeah, how do you think about this kind of balance between urgency and just kind of being in the moment?
Mm-hmm. I think about it a lot in terms of the form that time takes in your physical environment. Though it's really easy sometimes to think that like all clocks are created equal, like they're all measuring the same, substance, whether it's an hourglass or a digital clock or a shadow or an analog clock face. But the quality of our attention to time really changes alongside the medium through which the time is being communicated to us. And finding, for me, a design principle that I always use in my practice is to find an analog clock in my surround, whether it's like the shadow on the wall right now, and I know that it's moving this way towards me, or like the hourglasses that I've shown you, or maybe it's just a cup of tea. A cup of tea can function as a clock. As your drink goes down, the time passes. And so when we find ways to relate to time or the passage of time that are like tethered to our senses and to our immediate surround, I think it changes the quality of it in a way that brings, for me, a sense of groundedness, and the question of like, it sort of resolves for me the tension of urgency and immediacy by just bringing me back into like, what can I do now and how can I have some creative agency over the shape that time takes in my own life.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question as well. I feel like I could do this for and time has passed quickly. We're close to the end. All clocks are not created equal. All hours are not. This was a really special one.
Yeah, I would love to hear, or I would love for you to think about and share, maybe in the Figma, like anytime you're working on a product or a protocol, always like asking the question, what would this look like if it was expressed in a physical space? Like, what would my app look like, feel like, smell like, taste like if it was in a built environment? And then also translating that back. Now that I've made it into a place, what could I learn from that translation when I return to the digital? So if you have any ideas around that, or ways that you've seen that sort of feed forward loop between digital product or place, a physical place, and then feeding the learnings back into the digital experience and so on and so forth, that would be really lovely to explore.
Yeah. And Aaron, any quiet digital places where people might best find you, or things that you have upcoming that you're excited about?
You can find me on USB Club.
There it is.
And feel free to also send me an email. I love a letter.
Incredible. Incredible. The hourglass is the best thing that you can get, Dave, as a thank you to Aaron. I want to say thank you, Aaron, for taking the time. Thank you, everyone, for your questions and for diving in so well with us in the first fireside. We'll do it kind of like this every Thursday, but it's a blessing to have Aaron here with us for the first one. The way that we typically end is as an optional last place, can come hang out in the cafe for a few minutes. That quote from John 12:24 was in my keyboard. I was trying to leave the gather town link, but that also works. Just huge thank you. Such incredible questions. And we will continue the conversations in Gather and for the weeks to come.
Thank you all. It's a real blessing to be with you. Have a good rest of your day or evening, wherever time zone you find yourself.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
That's incredible.